Thank you all for watching the NHL Interchange, and today we are talking the dilemma in Chicago as well as news and notes around the NHL. Thank you all for watching us on i80 Sports. Make sure you catch us on our website at i80sports.com, at our Twitter at i80_sportsNHL, and on Facebook at the i80 Sports Discussion Group. I'm Brian. He's Tom. Tom, how are you doing today?
Doing well. We had some interesting news earlier this afternoon in terms of certain things. We have some interesting news for an organization that was very dominant last decade, and we got some guys in some new homes now. So let's just get right to it.
We're going to dive right in. And before we get into any kind of player coverage, before we get into any type of free agency or team coverage, we do have to mention a non-player who has been an important part of the NHL, an announcer who has been the voice of our generation. Doc Emrick has retired from broadcasting, and for me, I'll always remember listening to him for New Jersey Devils games, NBC coverage, Olympics, Stanley Cups. He has done it all and called so many of our favorite NHL memories. Tom, what significance does Doc Emrick do you feel to the NHL?
Well, he really has been the voice of American hockey for the last 15 or so years. He was the voice of the Devils growing up, so I always considered him kind of the enemy because I was a staunch Sam Rosen supporter. But, he really was the voice. He had left the Devils so he could concentrate on doing national games. He's called many big games. He's called that Crosby Olympic goal, many Ranger playoff games last decade where they were going on their runs. He's called basically every Stanley Cup final for most six until the most recent one. Outside of Gary Thorne, he really is the voice of American hockey. He's a guy, and it's not like he was just some announcer who was just brought in. Okay, well, sometimes they bring in a guy like Al Michaels to do football, but he's like a multi-sport guy, or a guy like Bob Costas in the past when NBC would do baseball. Okay, he would take the reins for baseball, or Joe Buck, for example, multi-sport guy. I know Emrick wanted to be a baseball announcer. It really never happened. He got to realize his dream and do one Pirates game in his life. He grew up a Pirates fan. But I will say one thing about Emrick is that he was very well prepared every time he got in the booth, Doc Emrick. He knew his stuff. He knew his facts. He'd always throw random facts out there, And in a way, he kind of picked up the slack once JD left the broadcast booth. He kind of picked up some of the things JD was doing in terms of information and stuff. But he's one of the most well-informed people, and if you really knew nothing about hockey, you could turn on a game and learn so much just from listening to him call one game. And it doesn't matter who was playing. You just sit there and listen to him, and you can learn so much about the sport.
I completely agree. And with Doc Emrick, what I always found so amazing by listening to him, I was always mesmerized listening to him because there are two key spots when you're talking about announcing. There's play-by-play, which is what Doc Emrick was, that was his bread and butter. And then there was color commentary, which, especially for years with New Jersey Devils, that's what Chico Resch, was really, really good at, spreading little teeny tiny facts here and there. What was so good about Doc Emrick was he could seamlessly transition from play-by-play to color commentary, bringing up new topics to bring up throughout a game, and he was just always just so on the nose every single time. I mean, with calls, you mentioned the Crosby Canada score. That was one of his greatest calls to me as a Devils fan, and this is going to twist the dagger a little bit deeper for you, Tom, as Adam Henrique. It's over, Game 7 in 2012.
Yeah, but it was Game 6 actually. But he did call that Derek Stepan winner that made me scream at the top of my lungs like a 10-year-old girl meeting the Backstreet Boys at 27 years old. He was responsible for that. I remember. He called that. He called that with the same excitement that Sam Rosen would have been calling it if the game were on MSG. So I cannot fault the guy for that. He definitely was neutral when he was doing his network television. But I'm going to let you continue. I just wanted to chime in with that.
Oh, no, you're good. You're completely good. To wrap things up in a tight little bow, Doc Emrick, thank you so much for your years of service and, giving us so many amazing memories of watching hockey for especially myself, for Tom, and for the rest of the NHL community and for the American hockey community. You've done so much for all of our lives, and we're certainly going to miss listening to your voice on NBC broadcasts, on Devils broadcasts, on Stanley Cup coverage. It's been a wild ride, and it's going to be different, for whoever we listen to going forward. And, for whoever's going to be stepping in for Doc Emmerich, they're going to have some mighty shoes to fill no matter what. Tom, do you think you have any guesses on who could possibly replace him, who might be a good idea?
Well, I know I harkened back on Gary Thorne earlier. A couple people were suggesting that. I did a little digging up on Gary Thorne today. Gary Thorne is like right around the same age as Mike Emmerich is. I think Gary Thorne is perfectly happy just doing his handful of Baltimore Orioles games and, leave it at that. I don't think Gary Thorne wants that load of work anymore where you have to go all around doing these games, and especially with COVID now. And I think that's really what drove Doc to retire, is that it's just the uncertainty of what next season will bring. He did most of the games, if actually not most of the games, all of the games this past one from a home studio that he built in his house, or that NBC built in his house, rather. Yeah. And I just think that him being 74 years old, I just, at this, and with the uncertainties of COVID and him being older, just maybe forced him to retire. I don't think it's going to be Gary Thorne. I just don't see it. I know Gary Thorne does have some background with NBC, as I know Gary Thorne called some games in the 2002 Olympics, if anybody can remember back that far. When the last time Herb Brooks ever coached the U.S. team. My guess is, and I did a little digging up on this gentleman as well, Mr. John Forsland, who does the Carolina games. Now, John Forsland's contract was up with Carolina at the end of the season. They haven't talked a renewal. It's leading me to maybe believe that Doc told NBC that before the playoffs, listen, this is my last year, and I got a funny feeling that John Forsland is probably going to be the new voice. You heard a lot more of John Forsland in these playoffs. And I think that it will be John Forsland come next year, will be the new voice of NBC hockey.
And that is honestly a very good educated guess. And whoever is going to be taking over for Doc Emmerich, to reiterate before, they're going to have some big shoes to fill. So Doc, congratulations on your retirement. And we hope it's, nothing but happy and safe going forward for you. Moving on, we're actually going to be moving on to a topic that I'm actually going to let Tom take the reins on, take the introductions for. So Tom, take it away.
Well, one last thing I will say about Doc Emmerich is this. Out of all the Stanley Cup calls, the teams that he called the most victories for were the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Chicago Blackhawks. And where we're going right now is to what's going on in Chicago right now. Right now in Chicago, they are starting to tear the team down a little bit. As we saw last week when Corey Crawford was let go, Jonathan Toews was not really happy with the direction of the team. Now, I can understand him not being happy. That's been his team, Him and Patrick Kane, they brought that team back from a joke to a team that was actually outdrawn by a minor league team, the Chicago Wolves across town, who has no affiliation with them. They basically brought the Blackhawks back to respectability after years of them being one of the biggest jokes in the league and maybe one of the worst run organizations in all of sports. And he's unhappy, and I get it. But what I'm saying right now is that the team has not been a contender for the last 3 or so years. After they got swept by Nashville in 2017, they missed the playoffs in 2018. They missed the playoffs in 2019 by 6 points. They still missed. And this year, granted, they did get there. They upset Edmonton in that play-in round. But if we were under normal circumstances this year, I highly doubt Chicago would have gotten there. Now, the problem with Chicago has been the way that organization is run. And I hate to harken this back to a guy here, a basketball guy, Jerry Krause, who was also a GM in Chicago. And if anyone here has watched The Last Dance, Jerry Krause pretty much said, players and coaches alone don't win championships. Organizations win championships. Now, I know that really rattled some people's feathers back then, but he was kind of right in a way, because the way the Blackhawks organization has been run since they won that first cup in 2010 hasn't been very good. After they won that first cup in 2010, they had to cut a lot of guys off. They had to get rid of Bufflin. They had to get rid of Versteeg, Andrew Ladd. They had to get rid of a few guys after 2010. And you'd figure in 2010, okay, they would have learned their lesson. Okay, we cut these guys off. We kind of brought new depth guys in. Let's go from here. And they won the cup in 2013, and they won again in 2015. But they just didn't seem to get that, you got to you have two cornerstone guys in Toews and Kane. And you had two veteran guys to back them up in Hossa and Sharp. But they kept bringing back these depth guys, whether it was Johnny Oduya, Andrew Shaw, Andrew Ladd, Chris Versteeg. They kept bringing these same guys back over and over and over again. And now the biggest problem with that was that they had two stud young players in Artemi Panarin and Teuvo Teravainen, both of whom they had to get rid of because they kept bringing these veteran guys back and couldn't afford to pay them. Now, if they had never had to have, if they had followed this, little philosophy that, okay, we need to just keep rebuilding and keep bringing youth in while keeping this team competitive, I think they still would have had Panarin and Teravainen. And had they still had Panarin and Teravainen, we wouldn't even be having this conversation right now. And if anything, I had figured that maybe Stan Bowman would have looked over to see what happened in Boston after Boston did clean house. But if you look what Boston did, they kept their top guys and were able to rebuild their depth. I just don't understand why Chicago didn't think about doing the same thing after 2015. They let Sharp go. If they saw the kind of player Panarin was and they saw how Teravainen played, I don't understand why they maybe didn't try to dump Hossa and try to dump a couple other guys as well. I just don't understand why they did what they did. And now Taves is upset. But what the writing should have been on the wall after they won that third cup. After they won that third cup, they haven't won a playoff series since. I don't know if you want to consider this one against Edmonton a playoff series or not, but Taves has a right to be upset. But you got to look back and see how badly they ran things after 2015. Brian, any thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, with me, it's tough because I think about the Panarin trade and I look at the return that you got from that trade back about, 4 years ago at this point. I think it was like 3
years ago.
Yeah, 3 years ago.
Brandon Saad, he's another one I forgot who they let go and then brought back. Another guy.
Now it's funny because in that trade where they traded Artemi Panarin, they dealt him to Columbus and they got Brandon Saad, who was a key contributor for that team. He did do a lot for Chicago. That's not to undersell it. And they also got Anton Forsberg, who was a decent backup goaltender to Corey Crawford. But when you cut it down the middle and you really look at what Artemi Panarin has done in the past 3 years, it doesn't even match the productivity that Brandon Saad and Anton Forsberg is. I mean, Panarin is so much more than that. He is a player that helped a Columbus team upset Tampa Bay. He is a player that was a finalist for the Hart Trophy this year for the New York Rangers and is going to be a cornerstone for the New York Rangers for the foreseeable future. To see him go at such a young age for Chicago when they had some prospect depth, it was kind of short-sighted at that point. You had other players that you could have dealt at that point. Maybe you could have looked at what you could have gotten for a Brent Seabrook at that point because you had defensive depth. And now you look at the albatross that is Brent Seabrook's contract and you look like we can't possibly move this because of all of his injury issues. He's going to be stuck on the books and he's going to be a future buyout for them. There's going to be no way they're going to be able to move that contract in the foreseeable future. And now you lose not only your starting goaltender in Corey Crawford, he was an aging goaltender, sure, but he was your starting goaltender. He's what got you to 2 Stanley Cups. He got you 2 Stanley Cups and he kept you in the playoffs. He was one of the only reasons why Chicago even had a chance in this current playoffs. That and Patrick Kane, but
Taves too. Taves had a really good.
And okay, not to undersell, but and it's also a decent segue. Maybe it's not totally the end for Chicago, and I'm going to play devil's advocate real quick because they do have some younger pieces that do intrigue me going forward. Are they going to need to retool? Absolutely, but that's what they're doing now, where they dealt a Brandon Saad. And you get back from Colorado a very, very good defenseman in Nikita Zadorov, who can play decent top 4 minutes for them, and he gives them a big physical bite. He's one of the most physical defensemen in the league, and that's Chicago's identity is crash and bang defensemen, especially with guys like Duncan Keith. You get a younger guy like Nikita Zadorov in, and that could actually help change, that focus back to, all right, we're getting younger. We're starting to get younger again, but we're going to still build around our core 4. But we're going to build the young pieces around it. Last year, you drafted a Kirby Dach, which in the regular season, he didn't really factor that much. But look at what he did in the playoffs. He really, took over in the playoffs. He averaged, I think, a little less than a point per game in the playoffs. And he really was a presence, a physical presence, as well as a scoring presence. So I would love to see what he can do if you are willing to slot him in the top 6 for this year, which is where he's going to slot for years to come. He is a very big center. He can play two-way, and what he'll really be great at is give him, some power play minutes, let him play in front of the net. He's going to score plenty of garbage goals that way. Beyond that, you also have Dominik Kubalik. And he is not just something to kind of stick your nose at bat. He is a very, very good player who I think could be another player that you end up building around for years to come. And that being said, we talk about how old Taves is. We talk about how old Duncan Keith is. Patrick Kane's not that old, and he's on the wrong end of his prime right now, but he's still got plenty in the tank and a lot that he can prove for Chicago. So I guess that being said, Tom, do you feel like the Blackhawks are more of in a retool phase, or are they slowly entering a rebuild phase?
I feel like it's a mixture of both. Now, here is the problem with them right now. And what you just said was spot on with all these guys. Doc, Kubalik, DeBrincat's another one. All good players.
Sorry, I meant to mention Alex DeBrincat. You're right.
All good players. All good players. Now, 10, 15 years ago when Chicago did this initially, they brought in complimentary guys to help Taves and Kane. Taves and Kane were still the youngest players on the team, but they were the best players on the team. All these guys are good players. But if you make a list of those guys, Jonathan Taves and Patrick Kane are still your 2 best players on the team right now. They are. And Kubalik, DeBrincat, Doc, all good players. But I don't know if those are guys who you can make as franchise cornerstones and build around. I really don't. Even, I know it's a retool. I know they want to get younger, but, right now your best players are still Taves and Kane, who are both 32 years old. Keith is a little bit older. I think Keith is about 36 or 37. I don't know off the top of my head. And that's your problem. Now, what I could see them doing next year is just holding down the fort next year and the year after, because the 2012 draft is projected to have 3 good the projected top 3 picks in not 2012, 2022. What year am I in? 2022. The 3 guys projected to go 1, 2, and 3 overall, they said could be number 1 picks any other year, all 3 of them. So I'm wondering if Chicago is just going to stand pat until then and try to get one of those guys in there to build the team around. Maybe you move Taves at some point. Although I don't think Taves will ever move. Maybe you can try and move Patrick Kane at some point and replace them, and then eventually, you have one of those guys along with the core I just mentioned, and then maybe you can, get yourself built back up to respectability in due time.
I also think the one thing that Chicago does need to prove this upcoming season is, all right, you lose Corey Crawford. That's a bit of a blow. You look at their depth chart right now. They've got Colin Delia, they've got Kevin Lankinen, and they've got Malcolm Subban. So this, obviously, you're going to have to go with a straight tandem. You're going to have to spread the minutes. I think Malcolm Subban is a good bet to make this team and to serve in some role in capacity because he's done it before with Chicago as well as in Vegas, as well as in Boston. Then the question becomes, are you going to go Delia or are you going to go Lankinen? And Chicago seems to be high on Lankinen right now from what I've been hearing. Management does like Kevin Lankinen, who he was an AHL All-Star this past year. So he's a player with some potential. He was a restricted free agent that did get re-upped this year. So I think there is some confidence that Kevin Lankinen is ready to take on NHL minutes. Tom, what do you think?
Agree on all. I think they are going to try and go with Subban, but I don't know if Subban is going to be their guy for forever. For now, yes. Forever, I don't know. If somebody is to go FA in a few years, and they are contending or looking to contend again, he may be on his way out. So I am thinking that I just think right now they're kind of caught. I agree with everything you said. It's just I think right now they're kind of caught in a holding pattern because you have a strong draft coming up in 2 years, but right now you still have 2 veteran players who are still your top 2 guys, and it's really hard to tell what they want to do right now. It's very difficult.
Yeah. I mean, it's obvious that Taves, Kane, the majority of the core 4 feel like they can still contend and can still give it their all. But I think at some point there needs to come that realistic moment of, do we shift the focus? Which is tough for any competitive team to do. It's really difficult. It's a really difficult conversation to bring up of, hey, did we run our course? Is it time that we need to really start thinking about getting younger? Should we really consider dealing this guy or letting this guy go? And it's tough. I think if you're Chicago, I think you feel like you're kicking yourself for not looking into what deals you could have gotten for Corey Crawford before he walked for nothing. And I think that's the folly of a lot of teams when they are kind of in doubt about what their own ability is and kind of in denial about where they are. Personally, I think Chicago is going to still contend and still, be a factor in their division this year. I would not be surprised if they miss the playoffs by a little bit, though. If they find themselves in the middle of this upcoming draft, I think that is a very real possibility. But I guess we'll have to see. And certainly if we have any Chicago fans out there, if you agree, disagree with what we're saying, make sure you comment on our YouTube videos. We certainly look at comments here and there, and we love to have conversations with the community. So certainly we're going to be listening to you guys on this as well. Moving on from the Chicago topic, we did have a couple key free agent signings over the past week, which we did cover free agency last week, but we did kind of gloss over a few very key signings that we felt were important. So we wanted to make sure we cover them today. First and foremost, probably the hottest free agent in the NHL right now did sign for a 1-year deal. That was Taylor Hall signing a 1-year deal with the Buffalo Sabres. 1 year, $7 million with $1 million guaranteed, totaling to $8 million total. He has a full no movement clause, full no trade clause. Tom, what do you think of this signing?
You know what? We were speaking about a Blackhawks player before in Marian Hossa, and this really reminds me of when Hossa went to Detroit for a year back in 2008. Buffalo is really trying to appease Jack Eichel right now. They finally brought in 2 veterans in Eric Staal and Taylor Hall. It rhymes funny. To appease him. You're going to have Hall playing with Eichel, and that may be a dangerous combination if it works out. But you know what it also does? It also helps their depth out. They have Dylan Cousins and Jack Quinn. I almost said Dan Quinn, but that would have been back in the 80s for the Calgary Flames. And Jack Quinn in there. And maybe, just maybe, those guys do make a team this year, but you put them on the third line. You ease them in. You ease them into this, and you see maybe if those guys really become the players or they're showing signs of brilliance out there, then maybe you let Hall walk. My biggest fear for Buffalo fans is that they are going to be let down by this. If they come in, Hall does nothing, they're going to be upset. If they come in, Hall tears the place up and leaves after a year, they're going to be upset. That's my only thing. Well, Buffalo, who is trying to contend right now, it does make me wonder why they didn't try and get him in there for a couple more years, maybe Hall has finally found a place to play. Maybe, him and Eichel can do what him and McDavid couldn't do in Edmonton. And, that's the only thing I fear with them is I think it'll be a good signing, and I think him and Eichel will be a dangerous 1-2 punch. They may even get Buffalo back in the playoffs this year. They're still one of the strongest divisions in the league, but maybe they get it as a wild card spot. But the thing with that is the biggest fear is that contract, because I could easily see him having a monster year with Eichel, him demanding all this money from Buffalo, and them saying, sorry, we don't have it. And there he goes walking again somewhere. I don't know where.
Yeah, and I agree. I think first and foremost, it is a good signing for Buffalo. And for Buffalo fans out there, you should feel like you're on cloud 9 right now and feeling happy that you actually do have a very legitimate scorer lined up with Jack Eichel. And that is huge. That is something that we haven't really seen in the past couple of years. You can say, oh, well, he had Jeff Skinner. Jeff Skinner is not the same ability that Taylor Hall is, not by a long shot.
But now you get to move him down to the second line and have him play with Stahl.
Exactly.
So that helps that out.
That's what's really big about this. This gives you mobility now if you're Buffalo. Now you can say, you mentioned Dylan Cousins, you mentioned Jack Quinn, and maybe they make the NHL roster this year, but at the same time, maybe you're not as apt to rush them up. Maybe you let Jack Quinn play another year in Ottawa this year. Maybe you let Dylan Cousins take maybe you give him a 9-game flyer at the beginning of the season and say, you know what? Let's let you season a little bit more. Let's let you pack on the pounds a little bit, really get you ready for the NHL game. So that way, when you do come in, you're playing top 6 minutes and you're not just kind of like turning the wheels, but not really going anywhere. This gives Buffalo a lot more time to actually develop the key prospects that they currently have. And like you said before, they have a strong team. This is a team that I think I could see in the next couple of years being a strong playoff contender, a team that could give a lot of teams a lot of trouble. And that's only going to happen if they really keep these key moves going. Like, they have to be able to entice a Taylor Hall after this point to, okay, maybe I do want to sign here long-term, because that was the main thing with Taylor Hall. He didn't like what he saw out in free agency this year. He didn't like the only having a couple of years or maybe 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. He wanted to sign someplace long-term and not have to worry about where he was going to go next. But certainly with the current landscape that we are currently in, signing a 1-year deal was a lot more ideal for him at this current time. So that way he could kind of assess where he is and then go from there. Another key signing that we saw, and it was funny because we mentioned, we don't know if this guy's going to actually sign here, and then he did. Alex Petrangelo, the other marquee free agent, signing officially with the Vegas Golden Knights for 7 years, $8.8 million per year. Holy moly, what a contract. Do you think that this could eventually bite Vegas in the ass?
Yeah, without a doubt. No doubt about it. He's 30 years old right now. He's in there for 7 years. He's going to be at least 37. I mean, I don't know. Some defensemen at 37 can still be in their prime. Look at Nick Lidstrom. I mean, I think if you put Nick Lidstrom in the NHL today, he's probably better than half the defensemen out there. But
possibility.
Possibly, yeah. I think that this may, on the back end of this deal, this may screw Vegas over big time. I read somewhere that Vegas was looking to bring Hall in. They were looking to bring Stamkos in. They were looking to build this super team out west to, I guess, contend with Colorado and really just maybe run that Pacific Division, without any real problems. Maybe Edmonton, but who the hell knows what Edmonton? One day they're on, the next day they're terrible. But yeah, at the end of this deal, it's going to be a problem. My biggest question here with him, and I'm going to reiterate this from last week, is Vegas has never named a captain. He has experience captaining the Blues to their first Stanley Cup in history. And I do wonder, and I'm still thinking this out loud, was St. Louis's offer, not St. Louis, Vegas, was their offer of maybe giving him the captaincy what tipped the scales and made him go there? Because I know Toronto was very heavy on bringing him into Toronto to be that legit number one defenseman that they really need. But I'm wondering if Vegas said, we've never named a captain. If you come here, we will give you the seat. You will be our first captain. This will be your team. This will be your room. I am curious about that. I'm wondering if that's going to happen whenever we start again, whenever that may be.
I think that is an interesting prospect, and I think it is something that is a possibility for Vegas. Personally, I think with Vegas's current window of opportunity right now, this is an absolutely win now move for Vegas, where you're hoping that within the first 4 years of this contract that Vegas brings home a Stanley Cup. And they've sniffed it for the past couple of years now. This was an expansion team that hit the ground running and did not stop. And you look at the names that they currently have on this roster, and they have some of the best players in the NHL currently playing on their roster. Mark Stone, Alex Petrangelo now, Max Pacioretty. I mean, you even have really, really strong playoff, players in Riley Smith. Riley Smith secretly was one of the best players in this entire playoff. And you want to go back and look at those stats. They're a lot of fun to actually look at. A key contributor for that team, Jonathan Marchessault as well, William Karlsson. So you've got a lot of strong players. And I feel like for Vegas, if you end up winning a cup within the first 4 years of this contract, that's a win. They automatically win that free agent signing, no doubt in my mind. If they don't, and Pietrangelo does not win a cup with Vegas, then I think we go back and look at this contract like, what else could have they done with the money that they had at that? And I think that is kind of a key question afterwards. There were also some other key free agent signings. Torrey Krug going to St. Louis, Braden Holtby going to Vancouver, Jacob Markstrom signing in Calgary, TJ Brody signing in Toronto, Tyler Toffoli signing in Montreal, which we will touch on even more when we do eventually give you our division previews. So because we didn't necessarily talk about them today, don't worry, we will end up circling our wheels back to them when we talk about key additions and key departures from each team in each division when we give you our division previews. Now, we do have a couple of interesting free agents left over right now who have still not been signed. It's been about a week and a half since free agency opened, and interestingly enough, forwards Matt Hoffman and Anthony Duclair remain unsigned, which is interesting to me because these are two top 6 talents. You had Joe Thornton sign a contract before Matt Hoffman and Anthony Duclair did, which is surprising to me. Matt Hoffman allegedly had multiple offers on the table for 3 to 4 years. He did not want to take them, and now he is apparently looking at a 1-year deal. And you also have Anthony Duclair, who could be kicking the tire on 1-year deals, but I'm surprised that nobody necessarily wants to go for a longer term for him. Tom, if you had the choice between either Matt Hoffman or Anthony Duclair, who would you go with and why?
You know what? I'd probably go with Hoffman. Now, I'm trying to look him up here. Are we talking about Mike Hoffman? Or are we talking about?
Yeah, Mike Hoffman. My bad.
All right, yeah, because I'm trying to pull his stats up here, and I'm going, wait a minute. I think he's talking about Mike Hoffman.
Yeah. Sorry, my bad.
I think I would rather go with Mike Hoffman. I mean, both have been enigmas where they've gone. But if I'm a team looking for some experience, looking to contend for a cup, and I'm maybe looking for a guy to put in my middle 6, I probably would pick Mike Hoffman. There were rumors about Hoffman's off-ice antics in Ottawa and his wife's off-ice antics too. But at the same time, if you were going to bring him in and say, listen, no BS, we're going to play on the third line. The guy still scores 20 goals a year. I would have to pick him just on his experience, Unfortunately, Duclair is like one of those guys who just gets thrown around everywhere. And, he was in New York with the Rangers to start. He made the team at a training camp and then couldn't do anything. Just as soon as he was in New York, he was out of New York. He's been on 4 teams, I believe, already. And I think that the problem with Anthony Duclair is Anthony Duclair himself. He seems to create problems wherever he goes. They say he's got a real attitude in the locker room with some people. They say he's not very coachable. So I would have to go with Hoffman just because I feel like he's a more serviceable player on the ice.
Yeah, and it's tough because I think both players are good at what they do, and I think either one give you an upgrade in your top 6 no matter what. I think there is baggage on both sides with Hoffman and with Duclair where you've got to deal with the baggage that Hoffman carries with him from Ottawa from a few years ago, as well as with Anthony Duclair and maybe not being that coachable player that you're looking for, and especially with how young Duclair is as well, to not necessarily be as coachable.
Yeah. One more thing I want to say about Duclair is this. He scored 23 goals this year. Decent season, 23 goals in 66 games. He potted 20 back in 15-16 with Arizona. And then his totals after that were 5, 9, 2, 11, and 8. The thing with Duclair, he's got his peaks and his valleys. Now he's at a peak. But, I mean, historically, he's proven that after he scores 20 goals, he just disappears.
Yeah, and that honestly is true. I mean, he's not the only player in the league that happens to. We mentioned Jeff Skinner before, and he was a guy who gets hot very quickly, and then all of a sudden, just like, where'd this player go? It's the same thing with Duclair, which also could be a reason why some teams might be kind of waiting to see where the market actually goes with him before they actually commit to a contract with him. But it will be interesting to see where both of these players go. There have been talks that certain players towards the bottom of the league have kind of kicked the tires on both of them. So it would not surprise me if they don't necessarily go to cup contending teams. If they're just going on a 1-year flyer, on a 1-year deal, it could be a case of a big fish in a small pond where they try to rack up as many points as they can get, and then boom, you have deja vu all over again, where you have Taylor Hall, Mike Hoffman, and Anthony Duclair in the same free agency class again. Unprecedented times like these could warrant that. But what do you guys think? Who knows? I mean, we are still in the murky waters of the offseason currently. We have plenty to talk about going forward in regards to free agency. And make sure you catch us every single Monday night on the NHL Interchange. Thank you for catching us at I-80 Sports. Make sure you follow us on our website at i80sports.com, on Twitter at i80_sports NHL, and on our Facebook group, the I-80 Sports Discussion Group. I've been Brian. He's been Tom. This has been the Talk Around the NHL.